dreams. I read a story about a lady in a town that I was writing about. This story took place in the early 1800s. She moved up about an hour north of her town to go to a doctor so that she could get help for like headaches or something. And again, this is early 1800s. Her and her husband went up there by horse and carriage, and first night away from home, she wakes up with a crazy fever. And she tells her husband, our town burnt down. And she explained to him the map of the fire and how the fire moved from this building to that building. And the husband's like, all right, my wife is probably crazy, is what I'm imagining, he's saying. He goes outside where this doctor's office was, where she's been, hanging out. And there's a traveler. And the traveler tells him, the town burnt down. There's a huge fire an hour south, or whatever, however far away. And when they got back, it turned out to be exactly the buildings that she had dreamed about.
Wow.
And again, it could just be apocryphal, but I was reading these in the newspapers of the day, in the libraries that stored them, for over 100 years,
right.
Or 100 years, I guess, at that point. So maybe they're just tricksters.
Maybe
there's just trolls. Early 19th century trolls, which is totally possible.
Yeah.
But I think there's some power in dreams if that
so.
Is real.
Yeah.
Who do we got?
Sure. We got Luke coming in. Luke, are you with us?
Hi, yes.
Spirit.
What's up, Luke? How are you?
I'm doing all right.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
What story do you have for us?
Yeah, so I got the story I've kind of been calling my Shadow Man story.
Ooh.
I like that.
Yeah, those are always spooky.
So, it kind of goes, I guess, in tandem with what I guess Tim was saying.
Mm-hmm.
Possibly, I mean, with time kind of, looping upon itself.
Yep.
And I guess also touches on that article you were talking about in the beginning of the show with like spirits are drawn to a place where evil happens, because I don't think that's the case in this.
Right.
So, anyway, so I'll delve into it. Let me give a little backstory. So,
Great.
My grandparents and when my mom was 2, immigrated from Canada. 60 years worth of foresight, I guess, drove that decision back in the mid 60s. And they were
Smart.
on their way to California when they stopped in Arizona and, had intense prophetic foresight and decided, no California, let's do Arizona instead.
Wow.
So
Interesting.
they jumped around the Phoenix metro area from house to house, fixed up places and then moved and rented out the previous house until they landed in a house that my mom spent most of her childhood. And across the street from that house that they stopped in was a house that just kind of called to my mom. Like she said from whenever she saw it, that's the house I'm going to live in. So it was built in the late 50s and was one owner. The people who originally bought it lived there for almost about 30 years. So fast forward about the mid 80s, my mom became pregnant for the first time with my first sibling. And just so happened at the same time, that house in the cul-de-sac across the street went up for sale. And so my grandparents said, well, we want you to be, near us. And so we can see our grandchildren. And, if you need any help, we'll help you out. So they purchased the house and gave it to my mom and dad. And they raised me and my 2 older sisters there. So now kind of pivoting the story to me, having lived there, obviously almost my entire life until I moved out and got my own house, there was always kind of a shadowy presence that I noticed. And I can't even tell you the first time I've seen it, and I've seen it more times than I can count. It was always there throughout my life. I call it the Shadow Man. And you only ever see him out of your periphery. When you're sitting alone in the living room, as a kid, you're sitting on the couch watching TV. Often your periphery to the right was, the dining room and then the kitchen.
Yeah.
And this shadow of a man would walk from behind the fridge, past the entrance to the kitchen, behind a wall. And it was always the same. He always walked that exact same path from behind the fridge into the kitchen. It was very definitely a man, and the only discrepancy that it would ever make was if you looked at it. It would disappear as if it was never actually even there. Like, instantly gone. It's almost, I don't know, it kind of gaslights you in its own way.
Right.
But if you did not look at it, you could actually watch it travel from behind the fridge and then past the entrance to the kitchen behind the wall that separates the dining room and the kitchen. And at that point, it's out of your view, and it you wouldn't see it anymore. It would just kind of disappear.
Right.
And this happened my entire life, from childhood, adolescence, teenage years. I never thought much of it. That seems something crazy to say, but
It became a nonchalant part of your life.
Yeah, I mean, it happened so much that it's just something that occurred. That's all it was.
Did you ever tell anybody at all, like in the beginning, or?
No, not really. At least not that I can remember.
Right.
Maybe early on, but not that I can remember.
Right.
But where the story gets kind of interesting, I would say, is one summer we had my dad was from Minnesota, and so we traveled up there to visit some relatives on their farm up in rural Minnesota, and we were gathered around a campfire at night. Due to the jet lag, we were always up way later than the rest of the family. But as the campfire stories do, it came across the topic of the paranormal, and someone posed the question: have any of you personally experienced anything like paranormal? And there was a few stories, vague and uninteresting, but the one that really shocked me was my dad piped up, and he said, I've never really thought much of it. I've never really told anyone. But he says, ever since we moved into the house, on the cul-de-sac that we still lived in at that point, he says, when you're sitting alone in the living room, a shadow of a man would walk from behind the fridge into the kitchen towards the back door. He says it would always just do that consistently and never did anything else. I know for a fact I never spoke with him about that.
Wow.
Wow.
And he described to a T exactly what I had seen my entire life.
That's crazy.
So I had to sit there with that knowledge and just kind of tucked back in the back of my head and process that a bit that night.
Did you tell him? Like, hey.
Yeah, I told him. I said I told him eventually. I don't remember if I told him that night, but we did have the conversation. It's like I've seen it too. And,
wow.
I mean, there's nothing we can do. They've been lived there for so long. My mom still lives there. It's been 40 something years, but nothing's ever happened. It just wants to make its little journey from the fridge to the kitchen, and that's that.
Just grabbing a late night snack.
Yeah, just going about its day.
But my mom is actually, she still lives there, and I brought it up. It's she's the second owner of the house, and she actually knew the original owners, and they did not die in the house. And being built in the late 1950s, nothing bad ever really, or at least newsworthy, ever happened in that house. So I don't know what this being is that seems to be kind of perpetually trapped in its journey in that house is.
Well, according to Tim's theory, it might just be thinking the same thing about you and your family.
Right.
Why are these people just trapped in this house?
Like Beetlejuice.
That's what I was wondering with that, was if it's, time looping back on itself, why is it this one exact action over and over for, 30 years now, if not more?
Yeah. The people who subscribe to stone tape theory would be like, well, maybe this is the moment before this person was slaughtered or murdered, and something horrible happened. But, who knows? It'd be another one of those things that'd be fun to kind of look into with a bunch of people, find the area. Obviously, we don't want to dox your family, though, so it's tough with that. But, it's the thing that I enjoy doing is looking into the history. Where was it? What was this place before it was a house, it can turn up a lot of weird answers or just more questions, which is typically the case. But did your mom ever see the entity?
No, I don't know if I've even discussed it with her. I did discuss it with my sisters, and they said they've seen it. One of them, doesn't. I don't believe in any of that kind of a person, so
right.
She doesn't really get in much into the discussion. The other one says she has seen it, and she does believe it's a man, but she like I did before my dad told that story around the campfire. She's trying to rationalize, although there's a wall there, trick of the light,
right.
Even though it happens all times of the day or night, it doesn't matter. So
right,
it's just something I can't explain.
Well, that's amazing. I appreciate the story. It's things like this that make me think the world is obviously mysterious and magical.